Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney, Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to examine the BDS movement against Israel as it relates to the efforts by the European Union to label Israeli goods made in the West Bank. And it is as follows. The BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, is a global anti-Israel campaign attempting to increase economic and political pressure on Israel to achieve the political goals of the Palestinians in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The campaign was started on July the 9th, 2005 by 171 Palestinian non-governmental organizations in support of the Palestinian cause for boycott, divestment, and international sanctions against Israel. The BDS campaign called for various forms of boycott against Israel until Israel meets its obligations under international law. In response to the BDS movement, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that these efforts will not achieve their goals. He said, first of all, they cause the Palestinians to become entrenched behind their obstinate positions and push peace farther away. And secondly, no pressure will cause me to give up Israeli vital interests, which is first and foremost the security of Israeli citizens. As a form of an initial boycott against Israel, in April, the foreign ministers from 16 out of the 28 European Union countries sent a letter to EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini, asking her to push forward the process of labeling goods produced in Israeli settlements that are sold in grocery chains across the European Union. Signing the letter were the foreign ministers of France, Britain, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Sweden, Malta, Austria, Ireland, Portugal, Slovenia, Hungary, Finland, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. In the letter, they said, the continued expansion of Israeli illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory and other territories occupied by Israel since 1967 threatens the prospect of a just and final peace agreement. The German foreign minister was the only one of the 5 major European foreign ministers not to sign the letter. Germany has dissented from the initiative to mark settlement products in the European market in great part due to its historic and symbolic relationship with Israel. Germany's ability to prevent a decision on the matter is limited, but it has clarified that it opposes the step and will be the last country in Europe to implement such a process. European Union Ambassador to Israel Lars Fauborg Anderson said that this policy is the byproduct of the EU position that we do not recognize Israeli authority in the West Bank. It is not a part of Israel. It is not of what we understand to be Israel's internationally recognized borders. The efforts to advance EU guidelines for labeling settlement products across the continent began several years ago. In April 2013, the foreign ministers of 13 European Union countries sent a similar letter to Mogherini's predecessor, Catherine Ashton. She began pushing the initiative forward, but put it on hold in the summer of 2013 at the request of U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who was trying to restart Israeli-Palestinian peace talks at that time. European and Israeli diplomats said that in private discussions between EU states that took place before the March Israeli elections, that many of the country's representatives said that if Netanyahu is re-elected, which he was, and forms a right-wing government, which he did, that they will have no choice but to impose sanctions on settlement products and take other steps to prevent Israel from crossing red lines that would make a two-state solution impossible. The actions that are considered red lines by the Europeans are building in the E1 area between the settlement of Ma'ale Adumim and Jerusalem, construction in the Gavat, Hamatos, and Har Homa neighborhoods of Jerusalem, both of which are beyond the 1967 borders. The European Union believes that Israeli construction in those areas would jeopardize the possibility of creating a contiguous Palestinian state and would not enable Jerusalem to serve as the capital of both states. In July, the European Council on Foreign Relations published a report claiming that the European Union is in violation of its own laws by not differentiating more actively away from companies and institutions that operate in occupied Palestinian land. The report cites as a legal basis the European Commission guidelines from 2013, in which it states that the EU and member state-funded lending cannot be provided to Israeli entities operating in the West Bank. The European Council on Foreign Relations includes East Jerusalem as well as the West Bank as occupied territory. According to the report by the ECFR, the main purpose of the new law is to push for a larger separation between the EU and any company or person associated with the West Bank. The ECFR seeks to force Israel to reevaluate its relationship with the European Union and to push Israel to adopt a Palestinian state. Additionally, the EU and its member states have been heavily funding non-government organizations whose primary aim is to internationally delegitimize Israel. According to Israeli Foreign Ministry estimates, these NGOs, many of whom are located in Israel as well as in the West Bank, receive between 100 and 200 million euros annually. Deputy Foreign Minister Tzipi Hatovli of Netanyahu's Likud political party recently traveled to meet foreign ministers from Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, Norway, Spain, and the United Kingdom. She demanded that they take a closer look at the spending that their countries are doing to prevent these funds from being transferred to NGOs that Israel has classified as anti-Semitic. According to Hatovli, the financial assistance to anti-Israel NGOs support boycotts against Israel, blackens its face around the world, accuses it of ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and war crimes, deprives the Jewish people of their right to self-determination, and calls for prosecution against Israel in the International Criminal Court, and negates the right of return. In response, the European Union agreed to push through a new law labeling products made in the West Bank, in a move that has greatly angered Israel and was seen as a major win for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. EU diplomats have long said that labeling product is only the first step in financial actions that will be taken against Israel's presence in the West Bank. When approved, the new proposal will create financial hardships for Israelis who have dealings with the European Union or European Union banks in the areas of banking, loans and mortgages, tax exemption status, visas for citizens of Israel who live in the West Bank, qualifications earned in academic institutions such as Ariel University, and the tax-exempt status of European charities that deal with Israeli companies or organizations that have a presence in the West Bank. In September, the European Parliament passed a resolution that called on the European Union to play a greater role in the Mideast diplomatic process and stated that the Parliament welcomes the EU's commitment that all agreements with Israel must unequivocally and explicitly indicate that they don't apply to the territories occupied by Israel since 1967, and encourages EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini to take the lead on completing the work on European Union-wide guidelines on the labeling of Israeli settlement produce. Furthermore, the resolution stated that preserving the viability of the two-state solution through concrete action and ensuring full respect for the rights of civilians on both sides must be an immediate priority for the European Union and the international community. Furthermore, European parliamentarians called on Mogherini and European Union Special Representative Fernando Gentilini to promote a two-state solution within the framework of the Arab Peace Initiative, and said that individual member nations needed to play a greater political role in the peace process. The 2002 Arab Peace Initiative calls for an Israeli withdrawal from the Palestinian territories in exchange for full normalization of ties between Israel and the Arab world. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the resolution unjust and implied that it echoed decisions taken during the German Nazi era. He said, "It is simply a distortion of justice and of logic, and I think that it also hurts peace. It does not advance peace. The root of the conflict with the Palestinians is not the territories, and the root of the conflict is not the settlements. We have historical memory of what happened when Europe labeled Jewish products." The Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman Emmanuel Nachshon lashed out against the European Union in a scathing response to the European Union action, saying, "The State of Israel takes the Parliament's decision seriously, in particular the call for labeling products. The process of labeling is discriminatory and reeks of boycott." He added, "Under the cover of a technical move, this is an attempt to impose a diplomatic solution instead of encouraging the Palestinians to return to negotiations," he said. "Europe acts toward Israel with sanctimonious hypocrisy, while it would never consider proposing a similar solution to northern Cyprus or the Western Sahara." Deputy Foreign Minister Zippy Hatovli said that it was necessary to call the child by its name, and that labeling products is a boycott. She added, "Israel will not allow anybody to discriminate between products made by Israeli citizens and the territory of the State of Israel," she said. "Efforts to move forward any diplomatic agreement by unilateral moves, especially labeling products, will fail and lead nowhere," she said. Former Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman responded by saying that the European Union might as well label West Bank settlement products with yellow stars. As a part of their initial decrees against the Jews, the German Nazis forced them to wear yellow stars. Yesh Atid party head Yair Lapid spoke with the European Union Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini and asked her not to move forward with the matter because this is a de facto call to boycott Israel, he said. After the European Union decision, Netanyahu went to England. He impressed upon British Prime Minister David Cameron that efforts in Europe to restrict trade with the Jewish state would cost the continent access to Israeli technology and strategic influence in the region. He said, "The future belongs to those who innovate. Britain and Israel are two great centers of technology. Israel is a global hub of innovation, especially in cybersecurity. And I think that if we pull our resources together, we can offer a better future and a greater prosperity." In addition, Netanyahu stressed that Indian and Chinese investment in Israel could surpass Europe's in the future, especially amid increasing efforts in Europe to limit business between its companies and Jewish settlement-related companies. In late September, a senior European Union official said that labeling of products manufactured in Israeli settlements in the West Bank would become effective October the 1st. According to the official, the EU was set to finalize by mid-October remaining legal and technical issues regarding the settlement labeling, such as how exactly to mark the products and how to execute the process. The official added that the EU will consider further punitive measures if the Israeli government announces plans for more construction beyond the 1967 borders in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. If this is the case, we will continue with moves against settlement expansion, and the marketing of products will just be the beginning, he said. However, in November, the European Union announced that they will publish the guidelines that would require the labeling of consumer goods produced in the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. For the European Union, the labeling of Israeli settlement goods is political. It is meant to put pressure on Israel to support the creation of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. It will not lead to great economic harm against Israel, as exports from the settlements to the European Union make up less than 1% of Israel's total exports to the European Union. Ohad Cohen, who heads the foreign trade section in the Israeli Ministry of Economy, said that efforts are underway to find new markets for Israeli goods besides Europe and the United States. He said Israel is trying to develop markets in Asia and Latin America to give those Israeli exporters who could run into difficulties while exporting to the European Union new possibilities. Well, this is going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you regarding the BDS movement, which is boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel as it relates to efforts by the European Union to label Israeli goods made in the West Bank. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.